DHS 20-year anniversary. The department was forged in the wake of the horrific attacks on September 11, 2001, and was tasked with the critical mission of protecting our nation against those who would do us harm. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to convey my sincere appreciation for the tireless and often thankless work done by the men and women of DHS on a day-to-day basis. Turning our attention to the fiscal year 2024 budget request, this proposal is unfortunately more disappointing than it is promising. The budget is full of gimmicks that mask the true cost of protecting the homeland and make our job as appropriators that much more difficult. The administration's fiscal year 2024 budget request for the department is $60.3 billion, which is nearly equal to the current fiscal year. However, after accounting for the $1.6 billion in unauthorized TSA fees and the $4.7 billion in emergency funds for border management activities, the real request is nearly $6 billion above the fiscal year 2023. Now is not the time for budget gimmicks. For over 2 years, we've seen skyrocketing illegal migration at the border. The policy-driven crisis continues for one reason and one reason alone. This administration is unwilling to publicly dissuade migrants from coming to the border and to back that up with the action and authority it already has on the books. Bad policy drives bad outcomes, and the Biden administration's policies are undoubtedly driving our border security crisis. It is our job as appropriators to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, ensure we are not wasting money by supporting bad policies that don't result in desired outcomes. Despite your public statements to the contrary, the border is not secure. If it was, we wouldn't have 2.7 million encounters, a record level last fiscal year. We wouldn't have an estimated 600,000 illegal migrants who got away from agents and made it into our country. And we wouldn't have our law enforcement professionals stuck administratively processing migrants when they should be patrolling the border. On top of all this, the Title 42 Public Health Authority of the department has relied on to turn back migrants at the border will likely expire on May 11th. When that tool goes away, the border security operations will be profoundly impacted. As we consider resources, it seems clear that the combination of losing Title 42 could cause will easily cause a surge that will overwhelm our dedicated officers and agents at the border. The Biden administration has responded to this situation with a proposed rule entitled "A Circumvention of Lawful Pathways," which is being touted as an effective border security measure. However, this does not solve the problem at hand, and instead it abuses the parole system by allowing tens of thousands of migrants with no permanent lawful path to citizenship into the country. The administration's response also includes taking out crucial funding for addressing the border crisis out of its own base and instead funneling it into a slush fund that will have little impact on mitigating the border chaos. The proposed emergency $4.7 billion Southwest Border Contingency Fund only ensure that we will spend more hard-earned tax dollars to achieve the same results and less oversight from Congress. Conditioning additional funds to worsening conditions incentivizes this administration to not solve problems and do their job in the first place. Building more soft-sided facilities for processing and then releasing migrants into the interior hasn't worked. Decreasing detention capacity hasn't worked. Border security operators have been clear. Without consequences, the illegal flow will continue unabated. We cannot manage our way out of this crisis with a blank check for processing capacity and non-governmental organizations. These actions only facilitate lawlessness and encourage more migrants to make this dangerous journey north. The lack of transparency in this budget proposal is frustrating. Today, I'd like to get more specific on funding and outcomes, what has worked, what hasn't, and how we could sufficiently resource the department to carry out its important missions. I look forward to working with you and the department to seek solutions to address the border security crisis at hand and combat the many threats facing our homeland. I now turn to my distinguished colleague, Mr. Cuellar, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair, it's a pleasure, members of the committee. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being here with us. I do have a prepared statement, but I'm just going to summarize it because I want to give you the opportunity to provide your statement on this. But Homeland is very important to me. Like I always tell my friends, I don't go visit the border. I actually live there. My family lives there, and we work there, and we live there, go to church and everything. So the border is very important. And trying to find that balance between security, that is providing security there at the border is very important, but at the same time, allowing trade and tourism, which are so important to our area. You know, Laredo, the largest inland port, we get 17,000 trailers a day. So it's not only the men and women in green that are important, but also the men and women in blue. And so not only hiring new officers are important, but now the support staff, the border processing coordinators are very important. So one of the things that I want to focus on, and I hope that we all focus on, are what are the facts. For example, if we talk about drugs coming into the U.S., there are times where people say, "Oh, migrants are bringing in the drugs," but when you look at the numbers from the Office of Field Operations at a port of entry, as of January fiscal year 2023, 98% of the meth came through ports of entry, 97% of the fentanyl port of entry, 87% of the cocaine port of entry, 94% of the heroin port of entry, 58% of marijuana ports of entry. And yes, Border Patrol does catch what comes in, but I want to make sure that we put resources, that technology at the ports of entry, where it's K-9 officers, support staff, working with our counterparts. And one of the good things when we went with Senator Cornyn on a delegation to Mexico, Mexico is now for the first time buying some of the same technology, same companies that we use at the ports of entry. So that way they can talk to each other. The technology can talk to each other. So that is very important. Now, one of my concerns is procurement. How long it takes. We'll put in the money, but it takes a long time to get the technology. So we got to find a way to streamline the procurement process. And on top of that, it's not only adding money for the technology, but the footprints of the bridges are very important. And a lot of times we don't appropriate money to make sure that we can put the machines where they have to be. So that's one of the things that we have to focus on. And talking about who brings in the drugs, according to the Sentencing Commission, the latest numbers that we have, fiscal year 21, 86.2% were U.S. citizens that are used by the criminal organizations. So I just want to make sure that we put the focus and the monies where we need to look at, and look at, not 14th century solutions, but 21st century solutions. We know the drones that the bad guys are using, and we need to counter the drones that they're using, the tunnels and other ways. But I'm also concerned about what happens on May 11th. You and I have had conversations. I'm one of the ones that supports the new rule that will be coming out. I do support Title 42, but I do understand that it's coming to an end. And I'm one of those that I feel that Title 8, if we do expedited work process in deportations when the case calls, actually works better than Title 42, because Title 42, you expel people, you don't deport people. There's no bars for somebody that's expelled under Title 42. But Title 8, you have 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, or lifetime bars, depending on the facts. So that is actually more, I think, provides teeth than Title 42. So we look forward working with you on this new rule coming in. Again, provide the law and order, the border security, but at the same time respect the rights of the asylum folks. Finally, to conclude, let me just say this. One of the things that Mexico, we spent 4.5 hours with the president's cabinet. There are some ideas that I want to follow up. For example, the fentanyl. What is the agreement? What are we doing? They're basically saying, we'll work with you on fentanyl, but stop the guns from going back over there. So those are things that I'm hoping that we can explore. And with that, I say thank you so much to your men and women that work for you across the agency. And Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. I'd now like to recognize the chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. Granger, for her opening statement.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman Joyce. Thank you, Mr. Sec. I'm sorry, thank you. Has not improved. And living in Texas, I've been there many, many times. Last year, a record 2.7 million migrants attempted to cross the border. 2.7 million. This year, it's telling me it's even worse. We've already had more than 1 million migrants encounters. In May, Title 42, you talked about, the Congressman talked about that. We want the thing that works best. And Title 8 will work better than that. The cartels or the traffickers, they have no fear. They're not afraid of what we're going to do or where we're going to send them behind. They're not doing that. They're coming across our border, and drugs are coming across our border in huge numbers. Drugs are affecting all the communities, not just the Southwest, but all over. You said you have operational control on the border. I'd say this, but I don't agree. The administration must reverse course on the situation, or it's going to get worse. We can't imagine it getting worse than it is now, worse than it is now. And now, if some that have been able to go into the area can't even come close to it now because of the danger. You have to have a strong voice in this. The border isn't open, and if you try to cross illegally, you'll be quickly sent home. We have to be clear, and we have to work together on this. It's not going to work any other way. But when we're seeing what's happened to our border, what's happened to our schools, what's happened to our freedom, it's just a tragedy. And I've done this many, many times over many, many years, and had friends that had on both sides of that border. And now no one goes there. Mr. Secretary, the administration has to acknowledge what we all know, and that's the wall does work. And I explained that to so many people, and it wasn't the wall we'll have a wall that'll stop it. It's what's inside that wall. It's inside the wall so that we'll know when people are trying to come across that. And so that technology was so important. I think it was a step, and as soon as it was built, I went down there and visited, whatever, and now it's just sitting there. To close, I want to extend my appreciation to the men and women of the department when they're trying to fix this. I'll do everything in my power to be helpful, but we can't just live with what's here now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Granger. Secretary Mayorkas, without objection, your full written testimony will be entered into the record. With that in mind, we'd ask you to please summarize your opening statement in 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Cuellar, Chairwoman Granger. On Sunday, I traveled to Rolling Fork, Mississippi, to assure the residents there and others in Mississippi devastated by the tornadoes that had just struck that our department will support their recovery in the days, weeks, and months ahead. More than 20 people lost their lives, and many more lost their homes and all they possessed. On Monday, I spoke with Senators Blackburn and Hagerty, and with Governor Lee and Mayor Cooper, and offered our department's response in response to the tragic and too tragic and senseless murder of children and adults at St. Paul Christian School in Nashville, Tennessee. Our thoughts, prayers, and support are with all who are suffering today. Over the past 20 years, the department has evolved and responded capably to an increasingly dynamic threat landscape. We have done this through the unflinching dedication of the department's 260,000 public servants, the third largest workforce in the federal government. Every day, these heroes work to ensure the safety of Americans in the skies and on the seas, secure our borders, promote lawful trade and travel, provide relief when disaster strikes, advance the security of cyberspace and critical infrastructure, stop cartels from trafficking illegal drugs into our communities, combat human trafficking and online child sexual exploitation, protect our interests in the Arctic and the Indo-Pacific, and much more. The threats and challenges facing the homeland have never been more complex or dynamic. The President's fiscal year 2024 budget for DHS was crafted to meet these threats and challenges strategically and responsibly, ensuring our department has the tools it needs to keep our communities safe. The displacement of people across the region is greater than at any time since World War II. I have visited the southwest border approximately 16 times as Secretary to meet with our personnel and to see firsthand the challenges they face and the tools they need to do their jobs. The fiscal year 24 budget proposes the hiring of more than 1,400 additional personnel to secure the southwest border, including 350 additional Border Patrol agents and 310 additional Border Patrol processing coordinators to get more agents back into the field performing their critical law enforcement mission. The budget proposes $535 million in new funds for border technology, $305 million of which is to deploy new technologies and capabilities in our fight against the trafficking of fentanyl through our ports of entry. The threat environment we face along the southwest border is dynamic, and the annual appropriations process does not provide the flexibility to address challenges that often change sector to sector, month to month. We propose that Congress create a fund that can be spent for specific purposes when certain migrant encounter thresholds are met. This would equip our personnel with the tools they need to meet migration surges if and as they occur, like transportation resources, soft-sided facilities for processing, and grants to support state and local community reception. The budget will also enable the department to process the increasing number of asylum cases, address the backlog of applications for immigration benefits, support the Citizenship and Integration Grant Program, and improve refugee processing to meet the goal of admitting up to 125,000 refugees. Our schools, hospitals, businesses, local governments, and critical infrastructure are increasingly the targets of cyber attacks launched by transnational criminal organizations and hostile nation states, including the PRC, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. This budget invests in personnel, infrastructure, and enhanced tools and services to increase the cybersecurity preparedness and resilience of our networks and critical infrastructure. We must also continue to build a culture of preparedness so that communities on the front lines of climate change and increasing extreme weather events are informed, ready, and resilient. This budget provides $20.1 billion for FEMA to assist individuals and state, local, tribal, and territorial partners impacted by major disasters and funds whole of community efforts to building climate resilience. The United States Coast Guard provides critical capabilities and broad authorities to defend our national interests in the Western Hemisphere, the Arctic, and the Indo-Pacific. This budget makes strategic investments in the Coast Guard's fleet of offshore patrol cutters and polar security cutters that will advance our safety, security, and economic prosperity. Finally, the men and women of DHS who serve our nation are our most important and vital resource. We cannot expect to recruit and retain a world-class, diverse workforce if they are not compensated fairly. We are asking for $1.4 billion to honor the promise of pay fairness for our TSA workforce. This budget will enable the department to respond to the threats of today and prepare for the threats of tomorrow. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Congress provided more than $5.8 billion in appropriated funding for the border wall, and during the last administration, many miles of new and replacement barriers were built. The chief of the Border Patrol recently told us, this subcommittee, that walls work. However, this president not only refuses to build additional barriers, but his administration, and specifically your department, is taking every possible action not to expend the funds Congress explicitly provided for wall construction. There is rusting walls sitting in the dirt in the El Paso sector that taxpayers have paid for, that you refuse to put up, and there's no rational reason for that. So I ask you, do you agree with Chief Ortez that walls work, and do you believe that additional barriers are necessary to secure the border? If not, and if so, why aren't you building more?
Mr. Chairman, I have approved, I believe it is approximately 129 wall projects to close gaps in the existing wall, to technologize, to bring technology to the gates to complete those projects. What we are seeking to invest in is our personnel, our greatest resource, as well as technology that is an extraordinary force multiplier to help secure the border. We believe that technology and really harnessing the advances of innovation is the most effective way to secure the border and add to the tremendous resource and talent that our personnel deliver.
Thank you. How much money did it cost the department to cancel the contracts midstream when taking into account the additional work that needs to be done, such as stabilizing roads, drainage, and other mitigation efforts?
Mr. Chairman, if there was a cost in the cancellation of contracts, I certainly would be pleased to provide that to you. I don't have that number at my fingertips.
Thank you. 15 business days after today, I'd love to have that.
Most certainly, Mr. Chairman.
While the disaster at our borders is top of mind for many of us here today, we cannot lose sight of the budget request as a whole is over $60 billion across the department. I'm very concerned with the request of funds being for border management and not for border security. I look forward to having my colleagues dive into this some more. What I'm disappointed in seeing this budget request is a lack of prioritization for another frontline workforce, those working the front line at TSA, including the Transportation Security Office. Far too long, TSO's pay lagged behind similarly situated counterparts across the government. Before someone makes the argument that this is why TSA needs to be moved under Title V, nothing has stopped the department from prioritizing these workers to get them a pay raise now. Instead, what's been submitted is a budget request to fund an increase for the entire TSA workforce, including those at headquarters. I'd like to see pay increases just for the front line as well as increases in tech investment. Deploying more advanced technology to airports will greatly enhance security. Giving high-paid headquarters execs a raise will not. Sometimes I think we forget the federal government does not have unlimited resources, and we need to be precise and thoughtful on where we spend these limited funds. I tend to think investing in the frontline workers is money well spent. Secretary Mayorkas, could you explain why this request does not prioritize funding pay raises for only the frontline workforce at TSA who most desperately need it?
Mr. Chairman, I very much appreciate your question. First and foremost, we are prioritizing the much-needed and long overdue pay increases for our transportation security officers at the airports all over the country. They are our front lines, and I'm incredibly proud to support them. We also do believe that pay increases for other personnel are warranted. We are, to address a concern that you articulated, we are, in fact, in this fiscal year 2024 budget, investing in our technology and other innovations. We are harnessing those innovations, including exploring how we can use artificial intelligence to be a force multiplier for our brave and heroic personnel. So we are indeed addressing the prioritization that you communicate. We are indeed investing in technology, as you indicate is necessary. We also are providing for pay increases for other personnel who so richly deserve it. They are indeed in headquarters, but we cannot achieve we cannot support the achievements of one without recognizing and rewarding the contributions of all. This is a team effort, and all 260,000 people of the Department of Homeland Security contribute to the Homeland Security mission.
I want to hit on one other priority, and that's CISA. Over the past 3 years, CISA's budget has been doubled. They've gained several new authorities, and I look forward to seeing how CISA incorporates industry feedback in finalizing the rulemaking for CISA. It was great to have Director Easterly here just yesterday to testify, but Secretary Mayorkas, as the cabinet-level official overseeing CISA, could you explain where the significant resources CISA has been given is going, and how your opinion is CISA is making good use of taxpayer funds?
Mr. Chairman, the threat of cybersecurity is not diminishing. We are seeing cyber criminals only enhance their efforts, predominantly in the world of ransomware, but also in other cyber attacks against our critical infrastructure. Schools, hospitals, local law enforcement offices, so much more. We also see adverse nation states, the People's Republic of China, North Korea, Iran, Russia, engage in cyber attacks against our country. CISA is on the front line, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Its incredibly talented and dedicated personnel work every day to enhance the cybersecurity of our country and to ensure the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure, the majority of which rests in the hands of the private sector. We are investing in people. We are investing in technology. We are investing in grant funds to ensure that communities enhance their respective cybersecurity. There are many target-rich and resource-poor elements of this country that have to enhance their cybersecurity. We are doing so much in that regard.
Thank you. I've exceeded my time limit. I now recognize my distinguished ranking member, Mr. Cuellar, for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Mr. Chairman, let me concentrate on fentanyl. When you look at the precursors that come in from China to Mexico, you will see that they usually go to two ports, go through the Pacific, end up in Manzanillo and Lázaro Cárdenas. And then, of course, then the drug organizations will send them off to different locations in Mexico, store them, change them into fentanyl, and then from there, they'll go, and if you look at what makes sense, what's closest, they will go through the areas of California, San Diego, and Arizona, a percentage, and there's a percentage, but so if we know that most drugs are coming in through ports of entry, one of the things that concerns me is the major acquisition programs, how long it takes. It moves too slowly, it avoids competition, it avoids opportunities for innovation. And one of the things that we want to work with you is how do we speed up that acquisition while we still protect taxpayers' dollars? If we know what the problem is and how they're going in, I would ask you to work with us on that part. And then what you're all doing with the Mexican government, because for the first time, the president said, he said, I will officially ask China to stop sending precursors to Mexico. And then after that, I also read that you all are working with them on, I don't know which department, working an agreement. And what they want is we'll help you with precursors, but we want you to stop sending guns because Texas is the number one source of guns for them. So I want to see what are we doing to address the issue on procurement to get the technology. And keep in mind, Mr. Secretary, for the first time, they bought almost $800 million, and it's the same technology that U.S. Customs is using over here. So that's encouraging for us. So if you can address those issues.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Cuellar. We're taking a multi-pronged approach to our attack against the cartels that traffic in fentanyl. And I must say, as Congressman Guest knows, we share a past as prosecutors. I served for 12 years as a federal prosecutor. I have prosecuted cocaine trafficking cases, methamphetamine trafficking cases, black tar heroin trafficking cases, and we have seen nothing like the toxicity of fentanyl that is killing so many Americans, and this is a problem that has been around for too many years. We are taking it to the cartels in unprecedented ways, and we are working with the government of Mexico in that regard. I have visited with our Mexican counterparts as well. We are assisting them in securing their ports because indeed many of the precursor chemicals and the equipment used to manufacture fentanyl is coming from China, reaching the Mexican ports, and the traffickers, the cartels, try to bring it through the ports of entry.
And if I can interrupt, and members, if we look at the Chinese investment that we have in Mexico, and we got to be aware that's a different issue, but they're very smart. They will do it in the ports. So they're there at the ports. They get the legal and the illegal products going through there.
And we are very focused on that element as well. So with respect to your question about procurement, we have a procurement innovation lab to address precisely the concern that you articulate, which is to be able to harness technology, to harness innovation quickly. We need to be able to move quickly. The procurement process is far too slow. With respect to the ports of entry, we are surging our personnel to the ports of entry to increase our interdiction and investigative capabilities. The remarkable special agents of Homeland Security investigations have already begun that effort. Operation Blue Lotus, I announced last week, in its first week of operation, it is already making a significant difference.
And that technology, Mr. Secretary, is very important because if you want to bring marijuana, you can see a big old piles. And I've seen some of the technology you have in Laredo and other places. But now you're talking about pills, and it's smaller. And if you don't have the trained officers, you won't see those. You can't see them unless if you have the trained eyes. So it takes personnel, takes canines, and takes the latest technology, and the Mexicans doing that. So, Secretary, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. Now recognize Chairwoman Granger for any questions she may have.
Mr. Secretary, right now, I would say that protecting our border has been a complete failure. And I've been there many times, and it's tragic. It is a tragedy. Right now, Customs and Borders has $2.8 billion remaining for the funds to complete the wall. $2.8 billion. A little more than 200 million of it will expire in the next few months. We're just going to let that happen? All I hear is words. And see that border, it is a crime. It is terrible what's happened there. So what's going to be real about this?
Madam Chairwoman, as I mentioned to Chairman Joyce, I have approved, I think it is approximately 129 projects to close gaps and complete the gates in the border wall. We believe that investing in personnel, investing in technology is the way to best secure the border. We are intensely focused on securing the southwest border, to securing all of the borders of the United States. We are working day in and day out, and I must commend the heroic work of the U.S. Border Patrol agents, as well as the Office of Field Operations, officers of Customs and Border Protection, and the support from throughout our department. I do not understate the seriousness of the challenge that we face.
What's going to happen?
And
$200 million is going to expire. You're going to let it expire?
And if I may, Madam Chairwoman, the challenge that we face at our southern border, the challenge that we face is not exclusive to the United States. We are seeing an increase in migration around and across the entire hemisphere. Let me give, if I may, one example. Venezuela is a country with a population of approximately 28 million
My
people.
questions were on our southern Texas border.
Yes, but this speaks to the issue. It speaks to the seriousness of the challenge that is gripping the entire hemisphere. Of those 28 million people, approximately 8 million have fled Venezuelan because of the authoritarian repressive regime there. 2.5 million of those individuals are in Colombia. Hundreds of thousands are moving to Chile. What we have done, and we announced on January 5th to address the challenge at the border, is we announced an innovative program that provides safe, orderly, and lawful pathways to come to the United States for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, and delivers a consequence to individuals from those countries if they don't take advantage of those pathways and instead come to our southern border. We have seen a 95%, approximately
Sir,
95%.
That's not the question I asked. That's not the question and I've asked this question over and over and over. We know what's happening. What is happening to our southern border? Texas changed dramatically. Other countries have come there, but it's pretty simple. And I said there's $2 million that's going to expire, having to do with the wall, in a few months. That's a pretty quick, straightforward question. What's going to happen to it? It's going to go away?
As I mentioned, Chairwoman Granger, we have indeed, I have indeed approved a number of projects, and we will comply with our legal obligations with respect to the funds provided for the wall.
A mess.
Thank you, Chairwoman Granger. I believe in a request, though, you said that you had 129 projects that you're going to expend the $200 million on. We'd like a copy of how that's going within 15 business days as well. This time, recognize Mr. Newhouse. I just recognize Mr. Newhouse. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for being here today. And
Good morning.
We all appreciate the huge challenge at our country's borders. Just a couple of questions. Last year, the administration removed the numbers that I have in front of me, 72,177 migrants under the Title VIII authority. That does not include the Title 42 expulsions. This past December, over 250,000 people were encountered by the CBP. Well over half of those encountered were single adults. You know all these things. So in 1 year, the administration removed less than a third of the number of encounters that we see in a single month. And that's the backdrop of that is in 1 year, 2.76 million people were encountered by the CBP. So my questions have to do with some of those numbers. I'm curious, of those 72,177 individuals, can you tell me, were those people that were arrested in fiscal year 22, or were they prior arrestees that were being deported? Give me an idea of how quickly people are being
Congressman,
removed.
you ask a very important question, and let me share with you that Title 42 is a public health authority. Title 8 is our immigration enforcement authority. We sought to expand our use of Title 8 because it delivers a consequence, as Ranking Member Cuellar noted, and we were enjoined from doing so. Last year, we removed and expelled approximately 1.4 million people, the most ever. And that is because we were under compulsion to use the Title 42 authority, which allows us to expel people very quickly. And we were prevented from using our Title 8 authority as we had sought to do so. But it's very important to note that 1.4 million people were either expelled or removed from the United States last year.
Title 42 is going away. Title 8, you're telling me then will be utilized to a fuller extent moving forward, and so that we should see a greater number. My question has to do with those people that I referred to under this Title 8 removals. Were they arrested in this past year, or how long are people here before they're removed?
I see. Congressman Newhouse, you identify a significant infirmity with our immigration system, strong evidence of why it is so fundamentally broken, and everyone agrees on that. It has historically taken 4 to 6+ years in between the time of encounter, the time an individual is encountered at our southern border, and the time that their immigration case is adjudicated with finality for removal. And that is not specific to this administration, nor the prior administration, nor the administration before that. I learned that when I first entered the Department of Homeland Security in August of 2009.
So if we could also request that information related to those Title 8 individuals and how long they've been in the country, I'd appreciate that. Throughout your administration, thousands of available ICE detention beds have sat empty. So a simple question, apart from the mandate with no discretion that the law provides, do you believe detention is an important part of overall border security?
Yes, I do, Congressman. And we seek to prioritize individuals who present a public safety threat or a national security threat. And if I may explain why all the detention beds have not been used, because there has been litigation throughout the country with respect to the capacity that we are allowed to fill our detention space. That has been especially acute in a time of COVID, when we have court orders requiring that we not fill a particular facility to its maximum capacity in light of social distancing and the like. And so there's a patchwork of litigation across the country that inhibits our ability to use our maximum bed space.
Well, I do have some further things I'd like to learn about, but my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for indulging me, and I'll yield back.
It certainly has, Mr. Newhouse. I apologize, Ms. Underwood. In the spirit of going back and forth, I got ahead of myself. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, nice to see you, sir. Thanks for being here with us today. Congress has charged the Department of Homeland Security with an incredibly broad mission. countering terrorism and domestic violent extremism, responding to mass shootings like the tragedy this week in Nashville, protecting our infrastructure and institutions from cyber attacks, leading disaster response and climate resiliency, overseeing our borders with a broken immigration system at a time of historic migration, and much more. And by failing to pass broad immigration reform like the U.S. Citizenship Act, Congress has not given the department all the tools it needs to address these challenges. But leading a federal agency means being clear-eyed about the political environment and making determined, data-driven choices that uphold our country's values anyway. So I was horrified to learn that the Biden administration is considering reinstating family detention of migrants. It is not just immoral. It's expensive. It's a bad policy that makes our country less safe. I'm a nurse, and I've reviewed the literature myself. The data are clear. Family separation causes long-term damage to kids' mental and physical health, and their parents too. Family detention shouldn't even be an option on the table right now, given the mountain of evidence against it. But reportedly it is. And so I'd like to hear from you what specific data the administration is using that would suggest any justification for going backwards like this.
Congresswoman, you mentioned two things, family separation and family detention. With respect to family separation, the heinous policy of the prior administration, President Biden created the Family Reunification Task Force
I'm
that I
asking
am
about
very
family
proud.
detention. Family detention.
you
What
mentioned-
evidence do you have to reinstate this policy?
No decision has been made, Congresswoman. I try to encourage people to present ideas. I try to create an open environment where people feel free to do so. No decision has been made.
So are you aware of any data that would support that option that you are weighing as you're making your decision?
I am aware of data on both sides of the argument, Congresswoman, and I can assure you that no decision has been made. We review the data, and we review all factors that inform our decision, not just with respect to detention, but with respect to every aspect of our work across the breadth of our mission.
The evidence against family detention is overwhelming, even within the limits of our current immigration system. The American Academy of Pediatrics finds that there is no evidence that any amount of detention is safe for children. Even the shortest periods of detention can cause trauma and long-term health consequences. There's also no evidence that it meaningfully deters families from coming to the U.S. Meanwhile, study after study after study has shown that alternative to detention programs, or ATD, are generally more humane and more cost-effective than detention. According to ICE, the daily cost to the U.S. government per participant is $8 for ATD, compared to $150 for detention. It's also effective. 95% of those on ATD appear for their final hearings. Family detention is immoral, it's un-American, and it's just plain wrong, and we have better alternatives available. Reinstating this policy would be unacceptable, full stop. This administration must do better. We have to do better, and we are here to be partners with you to get that done, sir, and to help build an immigration system that supports our economy, that protects our communities, and that upholds our values. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. Ms. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Thank
morning.
you for appearing before our committee and answering our questions. Your budget request, I believe you have $77.4 million for border management staffing. Is that correct on my number?
I believe that's correct.
How many additional Border Patrol agents does that number and that funding level support hiring?
So I want to make sure that I speak accurately here, Congresswoman. I don't want to make a mistake because there are two elements of the budget that go to personnel of our Border Patrol agents and Customs and Border Protection
So let's
writ large.
specifically ask for the agents that are
There's
out
a-
on the
there's-
border.
Yeah, there's a drawdown from the Department of Defense, which we calculate separately. Our department, since 2006, every single year has
I'm
depended
not
upon
asking
the
about
department.
2006, Mr. Secretary. I'm
I'm sorry.
asking about how many agents you're planning to add to your list. I believe the number is 350 Border Patrol agents, if I'm
350
correct.
Border Patrol agents in fiscal year 2024, and this fiscal year, we added 300, the first time since
this-
2011.
Is this what CBP is telling you they need to be able to secure the border and provide that operational security? Is that the number, or is it more?
It's 300. Remember something, if I may, Congresswoman, that there's a limit to how many we can actually functionally hire in a particular year. We need more Border Patrol agents than 350.
Which is my
that we're
biggest
sp-
concern, because there's
But we-
800 or so of those positions that are open right now. So I guess my biggest question is, when you look at 19,000 staffed Border Patrol agents, which is what we have right now, funded for 19,800, 800 of those positions are currently open. So when you're coming to us and saying you need more Border Patrol agents, the policies of this administration have truly affected retention for CBP. So when we're down 800 currently, how can you tell me realistically that when you're coming to us to ask for these many new positions, you're going to be able to feasibly actually hire this many new people?
Oh, Congresswoman, we are intensely focused on recruiting and retention. And as a matter of fact, I spoke with the International Association of the Chiefs of Police just last week about the challenges of recruiting and retention, not specific to the federal government, but with respect to law enforcement across this country. We are very focused on filling the positions of the Border Patrol, of filling the positions of Office of Field Operations,
Well, I
of
think it would
filling the
certainly help
positions
if
of
we
the
didn't
United
have
States
defund the
Secret
police
Service.
rhetoric around the country as well, because law enforcement is struggling. You're right. I hear that from my local law enforcement back in my district. It is why I'm so concerned about the security of the border, when the CBP chief is saying that you need 22,000 agents total to counter the crisis. That's a total of 3,000 more agents. This request only provides for 350 more, plus I mentioned those 800 positions open. So I see it as a lack of meaningful work to address the retention challenges. They don't match what CBP is actually asking for. Throwing out increased numbers looks nice, I think, but it does not actually address the reality of the situation at our southern border. Mr. Secretary, are you aware of how many times in your budget request you mentioned the word cartel?
No, I'm not, but I must say I respectfully
zero.
disagree.
It's zero, Mr. Secretary.
Congresswoman, we
In the
are.
100-page document that you submitted, you mentioned the word cartel zero. You mentioned transnational gangs once, if that's your preferred way of addressing the term, what you call cartels. I'm very concerned when you say you're addressing the cartels in unprecedented ways. The cartel activity along the southern border and in the homeland has escalated, and I can say both times that I have visited the southern border, I have seen that countering the cartel activity was a #1 concern for our CBP agents. But it's a clear indication that you're not listening to the men and women on the front lines. Would you agree that the cartels are a cause of the uptick of the deadly fentanyl surge in our country and the violence at our southern border?
I agree 100% with that, and I disagree with 100% of your mischaracterizations of our commitment to border security, to tackling the cartels, to battling fentanyl. And the fact is that we are supporting fully the men and women, the personnel of the Department of Homeland Security.
Well, the fact is that, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, we were here a year ago, and it feels a little bit like deja vu when I was asking you if you were hearing about the morale within the department at CBP, when the chief of the Border Patrol is telling us that the border is not secure and that men and women at the border feel disrespected by the policies of this administration. It's very clear to me, sir, that there's a lot more work to be done and that you need to listen better to the men and women who are putting their lives on the line every single day. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. Mr. Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just start by agreeing with all of my colleagues on the panel that I believe the situation at the border is a very critical issue. And I think anybody that walks away from that basic statement is not facing the realities. And I believe that this committee and this subcommittee can be and should be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem. We have too many in our body and beyond our body who view this in a very binary, polarized approach, and I think that there are eminent solutions that combine the best of all worlds. So I think we should try to focus on how can we come up with a bill that actually solves this problem as opposed to worsens it. I don't want to focus there. That's what I want to say about the border. It's critical. We need to fix it. But your department handles a lot more than just the southern border. In fact, Customs and Border Protection is 19% of your total budget, as I believe is the case. That leaves 81% in an area that you feel critical responsibilities throughout our government. You're responsible for the Federal Emergency Management Authority agency. You're responsible for the U.S. Coast Guard. You're responsible for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Citizenship and Immigration Services, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure
cybersecurity and infrastructure security, the Transportation Security Administration, the U.S. Secret Service, which is not just about protecting our president, it's about financial crimes around the world. You're responsible for federal law enforcement training centers that assist our state and local law enforcement. That's 81% of your budget. And so if all we're going to do is talk about the border, which is critical, then we're doing a disservice to the remaining areas that you're responsible for. So I want to give you a little bit of a love in terms of those areas because we cannot neglect them. Let me ask you 2 or 3 kind of quick questions along these lines. First of all, FEMA. Is it sustainable under your budget? Certainly it's been strained. It's 29% of your total budget. We certainly have seen an uptick in emergencies, and we've seen an uptick in the need for FEMA, including just the last few weeks. FEMA is in high demand. Does your budget provide a realistic, sustainable funding level for anticipated emergencies throughout our country?
Congressman, it does. The president's fiscal year 2024 budget does indeed support funding for FEMA. And the criticality of funding FEMA has never been more important than it is now. You speak of the increasing number of natural disasters. It is not only the increasing number of them, but the increasing gravity of them. I visited, as I mentioned in my opening statement, Mississippi on Sunday. And the tornado, the town that I visited, Rolling Fork, Mississippi, the tornado ripped through that small town, that poor town, in about 20 seconds. And the winds moved between 160 and 200 miles per hour. Just devastated the community. We are, in fact, investing in FEMA for fiscal year 2024, and I appreciate the support.
Okay, thank you. The Transportation Security Administration, Americans are traveling much more. Other people from other countries want to travel here. Does the budget address the incredible upsurge in travel post-COVID, pent-up demand, and what I think is going to be a sustained level of demand on the TSA? Frankly, I'm not sure it does adequately take care of that load, but I'd like to hear your comments on whether this budget addresses what you reasonably anticipate to be demands on TSA.
Congressman, if you have concerns with respect to the funding of TSA in the fiscal year 2024 budget, I'd welcome the opportunity to sit down and discuss those concerns with you, because we're very focused on TSA for precisely the reasons you express. Not just the opportunity, the economic opportunity of lawful trade, but also, of course, the security, lawful travel, but also the security of that travel. The fiscal year 2024 budget invests in our people, our greatest resource, not just in additional personnel, but in pay fairness for them, and critically in technology and other assets.
Okay.
We are harnessing technology in the air environment to facilitate the lawful travel and maintain its security at all times.
Okay, thank you. And finally, in the time that I have remaining, it's probably going to be a rhetorical question in the time I have remaining. When we talk about Homeland Security, I think we all know that we're not talking about Fortress America. We are talking about Homeland Security in a global context, that we need to be working with our international partners and allies in terms of joint Homeland Security efforts. I think in terms of my own Indo-Pacific, where you have wide partnerships with others throughout the Indo-Pacific in areas such as human trafficking, financial crimes, cybersecurity, et cetera. I'm just going to make a comment that I hope and believe that this budget enhances those partnerships, because they are going to be critical given the malign influence out there in the rest of the world. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Case. Recognize Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I'm just going to add to the concern that a gentlelady from Iowa had. It's strange the administration wants to hire 350 Border Patrol agents and 87,000 armed IRS agents. Perhaps you should go over to the IRS and see if they'll share some of that wealth with you, or support our efforts to perhaps transfer some of that funding. And that was a rhetorical comment. I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Guest.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Mr. Guest is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayorkas, today's Washington Times headline, Border Crisis Questions Baffle Mayorkas, Republicans Fume. I'm sure you would probably disagree with that headline. I know you didn't write that, but just want to talk about some statistical data about why Republicans are so concerned about what's happening on our border, specifically the southwest border, but also as we're seeing increased activity on the northern border. For the last 12 months, we've seen more than 200,000 immigrant encounters along our northern and southern border. For the last 24 months, expanded out 12 months beyond that, we've seen at least 185,000 immigrant encounters along our northern and southern border. We know that in the month of December of last year, we saw over 300,000 encounters along the northern and southern border. In addition to that, we see the growing chaos that fentanyl and drug cartels have caused in every community. We know now that the leading cause of death for individuals 18 to 45 is in fact drug overdose. The large majority of those associated with fentanyl. I had the opportunity just 2 weeks ago to be back on the border, my second time this year, but just 2 weeks ago in McAllen, where as a member of the Homeland Security Authorizing Committee, we had an opportunity to speak with Border Patrol Chief Ortiz, and he also addressed in an informal briefing members of this subcommittee the week prior. In that hearing, there were some things that I thought came out that were very enlightening. One particularly, when I had the opportunity to talk to Chief about some prior statements made by the administration, not only by you, but by the President, the Vice President, others, about the border being secure. And again, looking at statistical data, trying to understand how with the large increase in immigrant encounters, with the increase of drugs, with the violence that we're seeing on the border. Again, much of that on the Mexican side of the border. But we saw 4 Americans who were kidnapped, 2 killed, a 3rd shot as they crossed across the border there in the RGV sector seeking a medical procedure. We saw the recent rush of over 1,000 immigrants there in El Paso when someone put something out on social media that the border was going to be open. We know that drug cartels have become emboldened in the fact that they are making huge sums of illegal profits off of both human smuggling and narcotic smuggling. But when the chief said that 5 of the 9 border sectors were not secure, in his opinion, and he is your chief of the Border Patrol, he said 5 of the 9 sections were not secure. Now, he didn't specifically mention which sectors. I believe he was probably referring to Del Rio, El Paso, the RGV sector, Tucson, and then the last either being San Diego or Yuma. But I did not follow up with him exactly which sectors that he was referring to. And he also talked about that the number of gotaways that is reported by the administration, he believes is actually an underreporting, and that in his opinion that number is 10 to 20% higher. And so during the 2+ years of this administration, we've seen over 4.8 million encounters. DHS has reported 1.2 million gotaways, so that's going to be a total of 6 million encounters along the southwest border. Just looking at the population of the states throughout the United States, that total number, it would, if they were all placed in the same geographical area, that would be the 20th largest state in the United States. And so I guess my question to you, Secretary, is do you still maintain that with all the statistical data that is out there and with the statements of your Border Patrol chief, do you still maintain today that our border is secure?
Congressman, you have covered a tremendous amount of land in your remarks, and I very much appreciate the time that we have spent together addressing the seriousness of the challenge at our southern border. I look forward to meeting with you and discussing the matters that you have raised in your remarks preceding your question. I work very closely with Chief Ortiz. Actually, I selected Chief Ortiz to to lead the Border Patrol, and I'm very proud of his leadership and very supportive of it. The seriousness of the challenge at our southern border cannot be understated. We are intensely focused on it. I welcome the opportunity to speak with you about what we're doing about it, the surge of resources, the new programs that we are implementing, and how we are maximizing the resources we have to deliver the most effective results. I look forward to doing so.
And just a yes or no, it is, and I know I'm over time, and I apologize, Mr. Chairman, but yes or no, do you maintain today that in light of the statements made by Chief Ortiz, that the border is secure?
Congressman, I stand by my prior assessment because indeed I define it as maximizing the resources we have to deliver the most effective results. Our ability to detect, interdict, and respond to threats has only increased over the years because of our incredible personnel, because of our use of technology and harnessing innovation as force multipliers.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'm over time, so I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Guest. The chair recognizes Mr. Cloud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. In 1996, we passed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Response Act of 1996, as well as the Secure Fence Act of 2006, in part to authorize the construction of barriers along the southern border. You're aware of that, correct?
I am.
I'll note that was both under Democrat and Republican administrations. In 2021, we funded more border infrastructure. You're aware of that?
Yes.
And I'm sure this is basic constitutional, but as the Article I branch, our job is to make the law, your job is to execute the law. Is that correct?
Oh, most certainly, and as a matter of fact, I've been very proud to
And yet you canceled
enforce
contracts
the
for
law.
construction of the border wall. Is that true? You've canceled contracts for building the
Congressman,
border wall?
I can assure you that we will comply with all our legal obligations.
Right now, we're paying for border wall to be stored instead of built. Is that correct?
We are, I have approved, as I testified earlier.
Is that correct? Yes or no?
Approximately 129
Is-
gates and gaps, and so that project,
Yes
that
or
work is
no?
underway.
Are we paying for border wall to be stored
We are indeed.
instead of built? Thank you. And that include Texas, who was trying to buy it to build it themselves. You stopped Texas from buying border wall?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that. I'll certainly look into that and touch base with you in the days following.
You keep talking about force multipliers as well. When I talk to the boots on the ground, they talk about the border infrastructure, specifically the wall, the roads that go along with it, chopping down the cruise of cocaine, the technology that's involved, all being one of the most effective force multipliers in the sense that you can have 2 or 3 people patrol a few miles of border as opposed to dozens. It's pretty significant that we do this, yet Biden's border budget request takes the money that we've already allocated and moves it to other directions. Isn't that correct?
I'm confused by your question, Congressman. And
The
I can
border
assure
that
you
you're here to propose takes money that we've already allocated for the border wall and moves it to other objectives. Isn't that correct?
We are seeking to invest in people.
It's a yes or no question.
Congressman,
We-
we are
we-
seeking
we're-
to invest in
It's not
people
it's
and
not a either
technology.
or, people or border infrastructure.
No, that's why I'm saying.
You're taking what we've already authorized, what we've already appropriated for border wall construction, and you're wanting to rescind that and use it for other purposes. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, we will comply with our legal obligations for fiscal year 2023.
That's a very well-worded way to get around. You find these loopholes, and you're missing the objective, the overall objective of securing the border by finding these little legal loopholes to get out of things. For example, the Secure Fence Act of 2006 defines what operational control is as the prevention of all unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists and other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. To be clear, that's the only definition that exists legally of operational control. Isn't that correct?
I believe that is the statutory definition under the Secure Fence Act of
And
2006.
I understand a point that you've made that it does say all, and as long as it says all, you can never perfectly achieve operational control. You've made that point. But have illegal entries increased or decreased since you became Secretary?
There's no question. First of all,
Have they increased or decreased?
you are absolutely correct that under the Secure Fence Act definition, no administration has achieved operational control. It speaks of preventing all unlawful entries. That
Right.
means one
But your
got
job
away.
should be to be moving us in the proper direction. Yet
Oh,
we
and
have
we are
more
very-
illegal entries. We have terrorists coming across our border, and the fentanyl coming across our border has increased. All these things have gotten worse, not better. So whether you say you've perfectly achieved it, you're certainly not moving toward it. You're moving away from it. We all appreciate the boots on the ground who are doing their best to do the job, but I can tell you, I've been down there. They really don't appreciate the job that they're seeing and the leadership that they see coming out of your office right now. One other question I want to ask you, how many children have been lost between you and HHS?
Congressman, I don't know of a single child that we have lost in our responsibility to turn over an unaccompanied child to the Department of,
to HHS,
to the
yeah.
Department of Health and Human Services within 72 hours, which is our legal requirement.
The
I'm not
Biden
aware-
administration
if I
cannot
may,
find
Congressman, I'm not aware of a single
42,577 children.
child. I'm not aware of a single child that we have lost in executing our responsibility to take a unaccompanied child in
Right
our
now, the
custody
Biden
and
administration
turn it
cannot
over to the
find
Department of Health and Human Services.
42,577 children who are going to, quote, sponsors, many of whom are connected to cartels. And it astonished me yesterday that you have never seen these. I personally dug these out of the mud at a gap in the border. It says coming and going in Spanish on it. On it are digital numbers that the cartels use to track people to make sure they're paying their way, both before they get into our country and after they get in our country. I brought these as a gift to you because I have a number of others, and I'll be happy to give these to you. Last year, we were told that we were going to plus up the budget, and because of it, we'd be able to secure our border. We do all these great things, raises for the good men and women, boots on the ground. And I asked this question. I said, the problem is we write the check to secure the border, and the Biden administration gets it, and they say, yay, more money for human trafficking operations. How is that going to change? Yet what we've seen over the last year is the continued operation of the border being even more a sieve, even more aiding and abetting the cartels in their nefarious actions that destabilize Central and South America, Mexico, and make our communities less safe. And so if we are going to address the border funding, we've got to see action, and we've got to see those trends reverse. I apologize, Chair, for going over. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cloud. Mr. Guest is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, just getting back to border statistics, when you became secretary the last month, January of 2021, I understand you were not secretary for the entire month. There were 95,000 encounters along the northern and southern border. 2 months later, in March of 2021, that number jumped to 192,000. Since that time, there have only been 2 months during your time as secretary where those numbers have dropped below 192. October of 22, 187. January of, I guess, that would have been January of fiscal year 22 would have been 186. We've seen those numbers increase very dramatically. Now, we know they're down from the all-time high of December. December, they were over 300,000, and we've seen a drop. They still are greater than they were fiscal year last year. So January of 23, the numbers still outpace January of 22. February of 23, the numbers outpace February of 22. We know last year set a record of 2.7 million. Up from the previous record the year before of 1.9 million. And as I understand, we're on track to once again break that record once again. And so I'm trying, by using statistical information, to get back to how this administration can again maintain that the border is secure. I know you say we do a better job of detecting individuals coming across. But I think we do a poor job of deterring anyone from coming across. It does not appear to me that anyone has any concern about coming across the border and any potential consequences that may result in. Let me ask you this, Mr. Secretary. Do you believe that wall construction or walls in general, that they are an important component to securing the border? And I understand we're not going to be able to build a wall from sea to shining sea, and that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about in particular sectors of the border, have we not seen that walls are effective?
Congressman, may I respond to something that you said?
Yes, sir.
Preceding your question, because there are two things to remember, if I may. Number one is the level of migration throughout the hemisphere signifies that it's not a challenge specific to our southern border. It is a very serious challenge at our southern border, but not exclusively so. On January 5th, because you speak of deterrence, you speak of reducing the number of encounters. On January 5th, we issued new policies with respect to some of the most challenging demographics that we were encountering our southern border: Cubans, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and Haitians. And we must keep in mind that it's very difficult to remove individuals from Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua because of our absence of diplomatic relations. And so what we said is we will deliver a safe, orderly, and lawful pathway for you if you avail yourself of it. And we screen and vet individuals before they arrive at our border. But if you don't use those lawful pathways, we will indeed deliver a consequence to you if you show up in between the ports of entry at our southern border. We have seen a approximately 95% drop in the number of encounters of individuals from those four nationalities in between our ports of entry at our southern border. That is the type of structure, that is the policy underpinning that we need to pursue, and I very much look forward to doing so with you. More fundamentally, we need to work together to pass immigration reform because this system is broken.
Well, and I agree the system's broken. I mean, immigration court has over a 2 million case backlog.
Indeed.
We last year adjudicated roughly 300,000 cases. So my math, my public school math from back in high school, if you equate that out, that's a 7-year backlog. And so as we're talking about, we're allowing people to remain in the country. We're not allowing them to remain in the country for days or weeks. We're allowing them to remain in the country for years. And so when someone has been in the country for 7 years before they have an immigration hearing, that to me is a broken system, and I understand that that's beyond your control. But clearly our immigration system is broken, our asylum system is broken, but we do not have a secure border, Mr. Secretary, and that's where you and I would just have to disagree. I do not see any circumstance where I can go back to the people that elected me and tell them that our border is secure. But I would like to know, as it relates to barriers, fences, walls, whatever you want to call them. Secretary Ortiz was here, again, briefed members of this committee 2 weeks ago. He said that that is an important part of border security, wall construction. He told us in the hearing that we had in McAllen that he disagreed with the administration when they stopped wall construction. Apparently, you must agree that there's at least some benefit of it because you talk about the fact that you've approved 129 projects. Now, those projects you say are to close gaps, so they're not really for new wall construction for any significant purpose, but at least to close gaps. So how important are fences? How important are barriers? And why has this administration acted so slowly to incorporate that into the entire strategy? I mean, we're looking at a border strategy. And it seems to me that this administration, whether it be you or whether it be the people that you answer to, are just saying, we're not going to build any walls. Walls are bad. I disagree with that. I think that walls are beneficial. I think that they do a great job, and I know I've gone over time, so I'm going to allow you to answer, and then I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman, you are correct that the asylum system, as part of the entire immigration system, is broken. They're all broken. You mentioned that, that is beyond anything that we can do. Actually, this is the first administration that has done something about it within its administrative authorities. We issued an asylum officer regulation that enables asylum officers, rather than immigration judges, to make the final asylum adjudication. We are taking that years-long process that is unworkable and bringing it down to less than a year. That is our objective. And I do believe that closing the gaps is important, which is precisely why I approve those projects.
Thank you, Mr. Guest. My public school math also agrees with you. Ms. DeLauro, the distinguished ranking member, is here, of the whole committee is here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and to you, Ranking Member. I said in the last hearing, I thank you for allowing me to just interlope here. It's about 5 hearings today and trying to get to all of them. So, and welcome to you, Mr. Secretary. It's a pleasure to see you. Mr. Secretary, you recently highlighted to this committee some of the challenges the department would face if it were to cut, as some Republicans would like, cut fiscal year 2024 to the 2022 levels. Challenges, I think, would be alarming: reducing Customs Border Patrol, frontline law enforcement staffing, reducing the department's ability to prevent drugs from entering the country, and cutting federal assistance to state and localities. Another area that I'm going to ask you to comment on is cutting TSA at our airports and what that would mean, and then a quick question about the Coast Guard. So if you can describe in further detail how dangerous would the cuts be? What would be the impact of cutting going back to 2022 levels in terms of Border Patrol, drugs entering the country, trafficking, et cetera?
Ranking Member DeLauro, thank you very much for your question. Cutting that budget down to its fiscal year 2022 level would be devastating across the breadth of the entire Department of Homeland Security mission. Not only would it weaken our efforts to secure the border, not only would it weaken our fight against the cartels and stopping the flow of fentanyl, it would mean longer lines at airports at a time when lawful trade and lawful travel is rebounding, a source of economic prosperity. The American public would be waiting hours and hours at airports. Our cybersecurity would be weakened at a time when adverse nation states are only enhancing their cyber attacks and cyber capabilities to do us harm. We would be less protected. Communities around this country would be less protected against an increasing frequency and gravity of natural disasters. We would not be able to respond as ably and to improve the resilience of communities across the country. And I was just in Rolling Fork, Mississippi, seeing a community devastated by natural disaster, a vicious tornado this past Sunday. I was there. So that covers FEMA. Our United States Coast Guard would not be adequately resourced at a time when securing the Arctic and the Indo-Pacific is more important than ever, given the aggression of Russia and the People's Republic of China. Our leaders would be less protected, given a cut in funding to the United States Secret Service, which also does extraordinary financial investigations that help secure the homeland. It would be a devastating move.
I just would say, and obviously, you know, I think sometimes we lose track of the breadth of the mission of their portfolio of the Department of Homeland Security. And so that if you track then each of the areas and you make these extreme cuts, that and I just say this in all sincerity, that I think, and the reason why I raise it is because, and this is to all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, that it's easy to say we're going to go in 2024, we're going to go back to 2022, but one has to take a look at what the consequences are about areas that you care about. There's some that you don't care about, and you're happy that it's going to back, but those things that you do consider and care about are really going to be at great risk. And the comments and the emphasis on border and the issue of drugs and the trafficking of youngsters, et cetera, would be, according to what you have talked about, is that would lessen our opportunity to be able to deal with that effort. And I would just say about waiting lines at airports, Americans are not terribly excited about waiting in lines at airports or anywhere else, and I think the repercussions on that would be pretty critical. I appreciate your testimony today, I really do, but I particularly commend you for the work that you do. Not an easy task as the Secretary of Homeland Security, but thank you very, very much for your commitment and dedication to the effort.
Thank you, Ranking Member DeLauro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, and I can't believe for a moment you wait in any lines, Ranking Member.
I do, especially the line that is for either Sally's or Pepe's Pizza in New Haven. You don't jump the line because it is a political disaster. Thank you.
Sheriff Rutherford is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I was very glad to hear you speak well of Chief Ortiz. I've met him a few times. I think he's a man of integrity, honesty. He speaks his mind. And I think when he spoke of the lack of operational control at our southern border, I think he did that out of a respect for his position, the officers that he works for, and I certainly hope that there's no pressures brought to bear on him, that he doesn't retire here in 6 months, or he's a good man, and I hope we can all continue to support him after this. I want to bring up migrant vetting. We know that DHS and HHS have facilitated the movement of migrants into the interior of the country without notifying local government agencies. And this is done either through grants to nonprofits, or in some cases, the unaccompanied minors, we even governmentally do that. And the problem with the lack of vetting that these migrants are getting popped up in my hometown of Jacksonville, Florida, where we had a case where an illegal immigrant came across the border, lied about his name, lied about his age, was vetted by DHS, turned over to HHS. They still couldn't verify who he was because he was using a fake name and a fake date of birth. A fake date of birth that made him a juvenile. And so we sent him to the interior of the country. We sent him to his Uncle Cuellar in Jacksonville. Not his uncle. They didn't vet his uncle. They just accepted it. They make a phone call, and that's it. They don't vet Uncle Cuellar. They sent Mr. Oyoha to Jacksonville. He killed Mr. Cuellar. That's because of our system where we're not vetting people properly. Then on top of that, this administration is not even confirming the identities of people that we're turning children over to. We've got cases where many children are going to the same sponsors, to the same kids. We're participating in child trafficking, all with the coordination or all without the coordination or notification of any local government officials, particularly law enforcement. The non-detained dockets consist of people that have been released to the interior of the country, and they're either waiting for their case to work through the immigration court system, or they have an order for removal. In fiscal year 2022, ICE's annual report, it was indicated that there was a 29% increase in that number that's waiting their time on the docket. Another really shocking number to me was that there's 1.2 million people that have had their cases adjudicated. They've gone through that long wait and been adjudicated, and now we have a final order of removal, but they're still in this country. 1.2 million. The number of people with final removal orders on the non-detained docket continues to grow. ICE is not making this a priority. And deportations are, even though they're up this year, they're way down from where they had been before, even under the Obama administration. Now, in fact, the last time you testified before this subcommittee, we discussed the deportation numbers, and I want to revisit that topic briefly. In 2022, as I just mentioned, it did go up a little bit to 72,177 migrants, and that's an increase from 2021 when there were only 59,000 removals. But that's still far below the Trump years. That's even far below the Obama years. Now, the last time you were in front of this committee, you said ICE was removing a higher percentage of criminal aliens in fiscal year 2021, and that was true, but it was a larger percentage of a much, much smaller number. Now, finally, since we allow people to invade our country because we do nothing to stop them, all we do is process them more quickly. The whole six-pillar program, that when Title 42 goes away, the entire six-pillar program, I've read every pillar, not one of them is designed to stop somebody from coming to America illegally. It's to process them more quickly so we can get them to the interior of the country, and when we don't vet them properly, they're going to kill more of our American citizens. That's what I'm opposed to. Now, because of the situation at the southern border, as was mentioned earlier by one of my colleagues, now we're having a problem at the northern border. In fact, we just saw an 846% increase in illegal crossings at the northern border. President Biden's open border policies have made every town a border town and put our constituents, my constituents, at risk. Every CBP officer, every ICE officer, the cartels, everyone knows it, even Chief Ortiz. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Sheriff. Last but not least, Mr. Trone. I apologize for the delay.
No problem. We had lots of conflicts. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. In this complex and often toxic landscape, we certainly appreciate the challenges you face, and we want to thank you very much and appreciate your service. Safe and orderly legal migration is in line with our shared American values and good for the communities, good for the economy. In this nation, we do not look down on immigrants seeking a better life. We seek to lift them up, and they become part of the fabric of our nation. Extreme Republicans do not want to acknowledge that securing our borders against drug trafficking and fixing our broken immigration system, they're not mutually exclusive. We know that 90%, over 90, is trafficked through official points of entry driven by U.S. citizens and legal residents, not asylum seekers. Cartels are not packing opioids in backpacks to be carried across the border. That's a myth, and it's harming our ability to develop data-driven and bipartisan solutions. So, Congress, we need to work with the administration to address this opioid epidemic as a public health crisis, not one linked to immigration, and expanding treatment for substance use disorder, and of course, disrupting drug trafficking as we can. Across the southern border, ports of entry, U.S. trucks and commercial vehicles are scanned selectively and not too often. The TCOs have long benefited from this. CBP needs to increase their routine scanning of these vehicles at the ports of entry. The president's budget put in $305 million for new, non-intrusive inspection technology to increase the efficiency of the 200,000 cars arriving daily without impacting business and critical trade. But without a systematic rollout at all the ports of entry, smugglers will continue to go back and forth, and we play whack-a-mole as they move their products elsewhere. The White House policy of ONDCP has set a goal of 123 scanners, large-scale scanners, up by fiscal 2026. Can you help us explain why we're 3 years behind?
Congressman, thank you very much for the question. We are really pushing forward on our implementation of the non-intrusive inspection technology. It is a easy, fast, effective way of detecting contraband of different types, including fentanyl, in passenger vehicles and in trucks and trailers through the ports of entry. We need the funding to purchase additional technology. We need the funding to hire additional personnel. We are looking to harness artificial intelligence. We also are critically in need of modernizing our ports of entry, the fundamental infrastructure, which is so antiquated in so many critical areas. For example, one of the ways that we seek to implement the non-intrusive inspection technology is in the pre-primary screening area. The Nogales port of entry that I visited last week, not my first time certainly, the Nogales port of entry is immediately on the line, on the border, and does not allow for the pre-primary inspection that Customs and Border Protection considers to be optimal. So we have a number of hurdles that we need to cross, and the fiscal year 2024 budget addresses those hurdles most effectively.
And 3 years behind?
Congressman, we are working feverishly. Ranking Member Cuellar noted the challenges of a slow procurement process, which is precisely why we have the Procurement Innovation Lab to cut through that. We're moving as quickly as we can.
Well, we appreciate that, and please keep up the work, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Upon mutual agreement with the ranking member, if we're going to proceed to a second round of questions, and I recognize myself to start. The Coast Guard is interdicting near record numbers of maritime migrants. Fiscal year 2022, the Coast Guard interdicted 12,500 migrants, primarily in the Caribbean transit zone. At times during the past year, its assets were at capacity for holding migrants. Discouraging migration along marine routes by prompt interdiction is important both for the U.S. border security and the safety of the potential migrants, particularly when the boats on which the migrants travel are often overcrowded and not seaworthy. The vast majority of migrants interdicted by the Coast Guard are returned directly to their home nation. They are not processed on U.S. soil. Despite the dangers of marine migration routes, increased security on the land border may push migrants to attempt migration via maritime routes. How does the budget support the increased number of migrants interdicted along maritime routes?
Congressman, Mr. Chairman, forgive me, Mr. Chairman, we're very focused on the challenge of maritime migration. We saw an uptick in that given the situation in Haiti, which is extremely dire, and given the authoritarian repressive regime in Cuba. What we did was we surged U.S. Coast Guard assets in the maritime environment to increase our interdiction capabilities. We are also critically enhancing our communications on those island countries to ensure that people understand the perils of that journey. Too many people perish at sea. To understand the perils of the journey, we are also building lawful pathways for individuals to be screened and vetted in advance and come in a safe and orderly way to the United States rather than taking that journey. All of those efforts have actually recently reduced the level of maritime migration that we are experiencing. With respect to our fiscal year 2024 budget, we are increasing the funding for the United States Coast Guard, which is so vitally important, as well as other agencies within the department that contribute to our maritime security.
Was that my understanding that Coast Guard assets have been at capacity for the interdictions and holding migrants? What is your plan if the number of migrants continue or increase?
Well, what we have done is we've surged Coast Guard assets. We've also increased our processing efficiency. We have communicated robustly with individuals who might intend to migrate. With respect to the perils of the journey, we have a multi-pronged effort to ensure that we are minimizing the number of people that take to the seas. And the program that we announced on January 5th, with respect to the Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans has also contributed to a decrease in the number of individuals taking to the seas, because we have delivered for them a lawful, safe, and orderly path.
I would urge you in your position as secretary to use your bully pulpit to put out the message that you're not going to be processed here, that you're not welcome here, and to stay where they're at. But that's up to you, sir, from here. I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cuellar, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, looking at the Secure Act, just to make sure, the statutory definition says it means the prevention of all unlawful entries, et cetera, et cetera. That means when this got passed under President Bush, he did not have operational control. Same thing under Obama, same thing under Trump, and certainly under Biden now. It's what we do toward that goal that's important, but no president has that true operational control. Also, just as a point of reference, Mr. Secretary, when you look at the last administration, let's say the second year of funding that Congress provided under the Homeland Security, fiscal year 20, let's look at second year of the prior administration, fiscal year 2018, the Homeland funding was $47.7 billion. The second year of this administration, it's 86.5, which is FY23. So it's almost double the amount of money that we put in. For CBP, the prior administration, the second year, FY 2018, CBP had $14.2 billion and ICE had $7.1 billion. If you compare FY 2023, it's CBP had $16.7 billion and ICE had $8.42 billion. So the money has increased under this administration, or Congress has increased it, should I say. Which leads me, we can add money, but it still goes to repercussions. Again, you treat migrants with respect and dignity, but at the end of the day, if we have to say goodbye, adios, then we have to do that. I mean, otherwise, if we don't have repercussions, and this is something very important to our border security folks that you have, you agree that repercussions are important, correct?
I do, Congressman. We are a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. We sought to deliver a greater consequence through our Title VIII authorities, and we were enjoined from doing so.
And again, just briefly on the wall, because I want to ask you about your parole program that y'all implemented. But on the wall itself, without due respect, it's a 14th century solution to a 21st century problem that we have. I can spend $36 million on a mile for fencing, and all I need is $100 to buy a ladder to take care of that particular fence. I think the numbers have changed, $36 million per mile, depending on the terrain. And you can spend about $2 million on technology for 1 mile of fencing. So I think the technology would be a lot better. And for anybody that's not familiar with Texas, as you know, the boundary is in the middle of the river. But the fence has to be, because of certain reasons, has to be, usually it's a quarter of a mile or sometimes longer. So you can talk about having a fence, but you cross the river, touch the bank, and guess what? They can ask for asylum at that time. Or they can use drones to cross drugs itself. So again, I want to make sure we have the money for the personnel and the technology. That's very important. And on the personnel, it's not only hiring agents. I want to hire more agents. I know the Border Patrol chief says that they're behind on the 300 agents that we allotted to. But it's also the support staff that's the analysts and the other folks. So it's, and especially for ICE, there might be some people that don't want to hire ICE agents. I do want to hire ICE agents, but we do need to hire the support staff for ICE so they can track the individuals that they're supposed to. So if you can talk about the support staff that we need to hire besides Border Patrol agents or
Thank you so much.
CBP agents.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Cuellar. It is so vitally important to increase the number of our personnel, including at ICE, including at Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The special agents, the enforcement and removal operations officers do extraordinary work and critical law enforcement work. They can't do that work without the support of other personnel. It is a process from beginning to end, and we need a tremendous number of additional personnel, which is why the fiscal year 24 budget provides for increased numbers of those personnel across the enterprise.
Let me, my time's almost up, but let me just briefly mention this, and I know Congressman Harris is here. H-2A, H-2B visas is a pathway that we really need to look at. I've looked at the numbers, and we got to get this done one way or the other, increase those numbers on that. Quickly on the parole pathway that y'all implemented on January 5th, and I'll close with that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. Recognize,
Well, can he just say a little bit about the parole?
of course he can answer your questions. Excuse me for interrupting.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ranking Member Cuellar, the parole programs that we announced on January 5th for the Cuban, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelan nationals who were arriving at our southern border in between ports of entry in unprecedented numbers because of the repressive authoritarian regimes in 3 of those 4 countries, and of course in Haiti, the terrible conditions there. We built lawful, safe, and orderly pathways for them to come to the United States, and we deliver a consequence for those who don't take advantage of those pathways and arrive in between the ports of entry. We've seen an approximately 95% drop in the number of encounters at our southern border in between the ports of entry of those 4 nationalities. That is the model that we are employing amidst or within a terribly broken immigration system.
Thank you. Chair would recognize Mr. Cloud.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologize. I have to run to help down on the floor really quick, but I want to make a couple points really quick. And that is, why does that word "all" exist in that statute? I don't think it's so that administrations can come before us and have an out to what their obligation is. I think it is there to emphasize the fact that in whatever discretionary rulemaking you have, that you should be doing everything you can to meet this objective. And what we've seen is the reverse of that whatever authorities you have are doing everything you can to create more of a flow, to transport more people into the United States. And from a larger perspective, yes, I agree. Work visa programs, immigration, and border security are related, but they are 3 distinct issues. We have to secure the border first. My wife is a naturalized citizen. So, and at some point the vast majority of us are descendants of citizens at some point. But half the world's population makes less than $10 a day. We do not solve those issues by bringing everybody to the United States. We have to secure our border. And I'll just ask you one more question. How many people can fit on a ladder?
I don't understand. I don't understand your question.
The point is that we have thousands of people riding trains. We've seen thousands of people charge our border. And with a wall, even if they can build a ladder, it restricts the flow and helps provide a force multiplier for our people. They keep asking for border infrastructure, including a wall, including the technology, including the roads. We can build it, and it's modern technology, and we all know it. And I yield my time to Mr. Newhouse, or to the chair.
Nice try, Mr. Cuellar. The chair recognizes Ms. Underwood.
Thank you so much. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to talk about disaster recovery. As you know, this is an area where my team and I have been really digging in and working with your staff on big picture questions around equity and resilience. We know that FEMA wasn't designed with equity in mind, so it's never really worked equally for everybody. Under our current system, disaster recovery can actually make inequities worse than they were before a natural disaster. Studies have found that in counties affected by large disasters, Black survivors saw their wealth decrease by an average of $27,000, while white survivors saw their wealth increase by an average of $126,000. And that's on top of the already enormous racial wealth gap in this country. Bold and deliberate policies are the only way we'll be able to combat systemic racism and inequality that's built into our federal disaster preparation, response, and recovery efforts. Under Administrator Criswell's leadership at FEMA, I've been pleased to see equity that's being instilled as the foundation of emergency management. It's literally the first goal in FEMA's 2022 to 2026 strategic plan. We're a few months into 2023. Can you share an update on FEMA's work to make disaster response more equitable so far this year?
Congresswoman Underwood, we are intensely focused on this area. And if I can share with you an anecdote.
Sure.
There was an article in the paper following a disaster that struck a very poor Black community. And the individuals in that community were unable to present to FEMA the required documentation of proof of ownership. And therefore, they risked being left disenfranchised and unable to access assistance to which they were entitled because of that lack of documentation. And our policy back then did not meet their needs because this community didn't have deeds of trust and other documentation because their homes, very, very modest homes,
Sure.
were passed down from generation to generation. So I read that article and we changed our policies. And we adapted our policies to meet the reality in which people live. And we said that perhaps utility bills, an affidavit would suffice to address home ownership so that we can reach an otherwise disenfranchised community. This issue of fairness, of equality, is of critical importance, not just in FEMA, but throughout our entire department.
Excellent. A big picture focus on equity is needed department-wide too, not just at FEMA. I know that DHS has a department-wide equity action plan that identifies programs with the greatest potential on advancing equity. Can you provide an update on implementing that plan?
So we are very, very well underway in that regard. And I have asked every single agency and every single office to execute on that plan. And with respect to details, Congresswoman Underwood, I'd be pleased to share with you more specificity in terms of our progress in that plan, but that is indeed one of our organizational priorities as a Department of Homeland Security.
Okay, well, I certainly do look forward to getting that information. I would like to echo Ranking Member DeLauro's comments about the Republican leadership's proposed cuts and how devastating that would be to programs like these, which would be essential to helping every American in the response to a disaster to make sure that we have equitable recovery in communities across this country. I put people over politics, and I certainly am not interested in supporting those types of draconian cuts. Thanks for being here today, sir, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Underwood. The chair recognizes Mr. Newhouse.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Secretary. Just add a couple more things I wanted to talk to you about. As you talked as well about fentanyl, I think I can safely say it's destroying our communities throughout the country. Recently in my district in Central Washington, I held a roundtable. I had multiple law enforcement representatives, families that were personally impacted by losing children to fentanyl. I had judges represented, prosecutors represented, people that provide services to young people and to drug addicts. And let me tell you, and I'm sure you've heard, the stories are devastating and truly moving. So it's not a stretch to say that this drug is destroying our communities. Last year, 100,000 people died from drug overdoses, largely from fentanyl. That's more, you and I are both of the age we remember, that's more than all casualties in the Vietnam War in 1 year. So it's a huge issue. I wanted to ask about Operation Blue Lotus. It's a new program, barely a month old. It looks like it's promising. Are there other plans in the administration to address fentanyl? Are there other options? I think, is it Title 32 that provides for the National Guard counter-drug program to show a force at the, I guess, between the ports of entry if that's where the issue is. I think I could say if fentanyl was COVID, I dare say the administration would have closed down the country until we had a handle on it. It seems to me that we should be putting all our efforts into this, pulling out all the stops to stop this scourge in our country. So could you elaborate on some of those questions?
Congressman, I stand with you 100% with respect to the scourge of fentanyl, the threat that it poses to our communities, which is why we are so intensely focused on it. And I'm be very proud to share with you details about Operation Blue Lotus that began last week. I also, before that, want to assure you that this is not just a Department of Homeland Security effort, but it is an entire administration effort. We have a strategy. In fact, the Homeland Security Advisor of the President led a delegation consisting of individuals, leaders from multiple departments and agencies to Mexico to address the fentanyl challenge that we encounter in the United States. I met with the law enforcement agencies in our department to review our pre-existing all-of-department strategy against fentanyl. I have never, in my nearly 23 years of public service, combated a drug as toxic and dangerous as fentanyl. And we decided that what we needed to do was, in addition to the resources that we already were bringing to bear at our ports of entry, which is where more than 90% of the fentanyl is brought into the United States, to surge even more resources, and specifically Homeland Security investigations special agents that not only display force, they do so much more because they bring the interdiction capability and the investigative and prosecution capability. So they're at the ports of entry. When we interdict the fentanyl, they can commence an investigation immediately of the individuals apprehended and refer them for prosecution, as is most strategic, to the Department of Justice. And so it is an extraordinary effort. I believe we seized 900 pounds of fentanyl in the very first week of Operation Blue Lotus. And we are not stopping at Operation Blue Lotus. I agree with you 100%. This caused the death of approximately 70 or more thousand Americans in 2022. This is a problem that has been building for years. I think it was in 2020, during the last year of the Trump administration, it killed nearly 58,000 Americans. This is not a challenge that is new. It is a challenge that has been increasing year over year, and we have got to address it. And we are indeed bringing an all-of-administration fight to it.
Is the National Guard counter-drug program being utilized?
I'll have to get back to you on that specific aspect of it.
Like I said, it seems like we should be pulling out all the stops here. So thank you for that, and look forward to the progress in Operation Blue Lotus. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. I think you'd have unanimous support for declaring war on fentanyl wherever it's coming from. Mr. Trone is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate all the efforts of my Republican colleagues and the total unanimous support we do have to work together. This is so bipartisan. You know, I lost a nephew. He died of a fentanyl overdose in 2016. And since 2014, this scourge has just replaced heroin at a $200 a kilo cost versus $6,000 a kilo cost, and 50 times more powerful. It's a losing battle, and we must do a couple things, but most importantly, I was co-chairman with Tom Cotton on the Synthetic Opioids Commission. We spent over a year on this issue with the RAND Corporation on budget from the NDAA, and we concluded at the end of the day that, quite frankly, we were not going to stop the precursors from China because China wasn't helping us. We were not going to stop the fentanyl coming across the border because Mexico was doing zero. And had adopted, the President Obrador has adopted a policy of hugs, not bullets. You're familiar with that. And he's made a decision not to take on the drug cartels at the top level other than some few face-saving gestures periodically, like before the last visit we had. So without their cooperation, Senator Cotton and ourselves agreed that we had to focus on the demand side because we can't win on the supply side without Mexico and China, who has just totally, turned us down. And with the cartels controlling roughly 30% of the $1.2 trillion of the GDP in Mexico, they're a force well to be reckoned with, and they're armed to the teeth. 56,000 murders, less than 1% solved. It's a country that's racked with murder and corruption at the highest levels throughout the entire country. So what's going to change? How are we going to change the government to work on the supply side in Mexico when Obrador has just said, forget it? Do you see this new policy as a real chance that something can happen? Because having been there on the ground and met with all of their folks, I just don't see it.
Congressman Trone, let me, at the very outset, express my condolences for the loss of your nephew. I'm very, very sorry to hear of that. We have to address this on all fronts, both the supply side and the demand side, and indeed we are doing so. You are correct that too much of the precursor chemicals and the manufacturing equipment is coming from China, and we have to stop that, and we are indeed working on that with our international partners, including with Mexico. I do want to say that we as a department and as an administration are cooperating with the country of Mexico in the fight against fentanyl. We are working with them to help them secure their seaport where the precursor chemicals and the equipment is coming from China. We have transnational criminal investigative units. Our Homeland Security investigations personnel are working with their counterparts in Mexico to interdict the flow of fentanyl, to interdict the proceeds from the trafficking of fentanyl. We are increasing our partnership with Mexico. That partnership has improved significantly since you perhaps last addressed it. We are very, very focused, as I referenced a few minutes ago. The Homeland Security Advisor, Dr. Sherwood Randall, the Homeland Security Advisor of President Bush, led a delegation, including the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, to Mexico to explore how we can partner more effectively. And we were that delegation was very well received. And a high-level delegation from Mexico is coming to the United States, I believe, in mid to late April to further advance that partnership. We cannot do it alone, and I think we have a cooperating partner, much more so than in the past, in Mexico right now.
I'm not going to hold my breath. The Mexican government has a lot of reasons not to be invested in this, giving the power of the cartels in the country and the lawlessness that how the whole country is run. So good luck, keep at it. But I think we had to focus on the demand side because that's where we have a real chance to make a difference. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Ms. Henson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, there have been some extremely concerning reports of increased numbers of Chinese nationals crossing at our southern border. Are you aware of those reports, and are you talking with CBP about them?
I am aware of those reports, Congresswoman. I am indeed working with Customs and Border Protection and other parts of the Department of Homeland Security and other parts of the United States government to address that. We are intensely focused on the security of the border in all respects.
Does anywhere in your requested budget note those reports or how you're going to specifically address the Chinese Communist Party as they work to exploit our open borders?
Congresswoman, our request for increased funding in support of border security efforts that we have underway, not just at our ports of entry, but in the detection, interdiction, and prevention of illegal entries in between our ports of entry. That request for increased funding gets to this challenge as well as the other aspects of the challenge of securing our southern border.
I think one of the biggest concerns is a clear lack of communication between CBP and ICE, and this is something that's been ongoing for quite some time. It's apparent in this budget request, and as I said earlier, I think increasing numbers and throwing out catchy names looks nice, but I think there needs to be follow-through. I mean, we're 2 years into a border crisis and attempting to muddle through it without accountability or addressing these issues that these policies have caused. Our border is not secure, and the Chinese Communist Party is exploiting that. 180,000 fewer removals in 2022 under ICE than in 2017, more than 2.2 million more encounters in 2022 fiscal year than in 2017. I think Iowans and Americans deserve accountability here for their tax dollars and for their numbers. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, but your data is misleading, if I may respectfully.
If it's misleading, I'm
Congresswoman.
going by data that came directly from the Customs and Border Protection agents.
let me
In 2022 fiscal year, 2.76 million encounters. Fiscal year 2017, 526,901. My public school math shows that's more than 2.2 million more encounters in that time. So I have some other questions for you, Mr. Secretary. Are you aware of the number of Americans who've been killed or attacked by illegal immigrants since you took office?
Congresswoman Hinson, last year we removed and expelled approximately 1.4 million people. That's the greatest number.
But are you aware of the number
if
of
I
Americans
may,
who have been killed
Congresswoman.
or attacked by illegal immigrants? It should be an absolute priority for you not only to know that number, but to know names of these victims. Are you aware of the number of CBP agents who have been attacked or assaulted in the line of duty at the southern border since you took office?
So as I was answering your prior question, we removed and expelled approximately 1.4 million.
Sir, the number is
individuals.
1,100 attacks on CBP agents at our southern border
And that is
from
why
21
precisely
to
we are,
2023.
and that is precisely why we are prioritizing the prosecution under Title 18, Section 111, I believe it is.
Well, if you look at the number of fewer criminals that were actually deported, the criminality data, if you look at fiscal year 2019, 247,000 removals, 56.86 were convicted criminals. Again, that number dropped to 67,000 removals. So when you look at the percentages there, clearly you're not prioritizing that because the criminals speak for themselves. If you're aware that there have been thousands of known criminals that have crossed our southern border. There have been over 1,000 CBP agents assaulted. Children are being forced into trafficking, as many of my colleagues have said. There are migrants dying every week trying to cross our border. If you're aware of all these failures and you've done nothing, what will it take for you to resign and step down from this job? Because I see this as a complete failure. What will it take?
Congresswoman, you are mistaken in your citation of statistics. You clearly do not understand the immigration system and how it interplays with the public health order of Title 42 of the United
Well,
States
what I
Code.
understand, Mr.
So what I'd like
Secretary,
to-
is that you are failing at doing your job. These numbers from Customs and Border Patrol speak for themselves. The American people understand that border security is national security, and this is a failure. The policies of this administration have directly contributed to the numbers that I am citing right here, sir. And I'm happy to share this document with you too, if we need to reconcile our numbers. But in my mind, it's very clear there's been a complete failure in you doing your job here, and we need new leadership as far as I'm concerned. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hinson. Dr. Harris is recognized.
Thank you very much. And, as the son of naturalized Americans, look, I believe in legal immigration, but not what's going on at our southern border now. Let me just ask you, do you support naming the cartels foreign terrorist organizations?
Congressman.
It's that simple answer. It's yes or no. Do you support the bill in the Senate that labels them as foreign terrorist organizations? I have a limited amount of time. That's a very simple question. Do you support it or not?
Congressman, it is not a simple
Okay,
question.
good. Let's go on to the next one because you obviously have not made a decision on that. This is clear cut. You would be much better off if you labeled them foreign terrorist organizations, your ability to control the border. But as the gentlelady from Iowa suggested, you don't want to control the border. This president doesn't want to control the border. Now, I'm glad you visited the border a month ago. You have a border czar, don't you? Who's the border czar in the administration? Oh, you don't know that answer? I'll tell you. It's Vice President Harris. I know you want to delay as long as possible. It's Vice President Harris. When was the last time she was at the border? Not within 100 miles on an energy project, at the border. When was the last time?
Congressman.
It was June of 2021. I know you're delaying. It was June of 2021. She's only been there one time, 2 million crossings ago. Now, let me tell you something. If you have a problem somewhere and you're running an organization, you actually keep on visiting the border to figure out if you're solving the problem. Our border czar should also resign because she isn't doing her job either. Finally, TSA has asked for billions of dollars in new money functionally by budget gimmicks and transfer money. You mentioned that airports are actually an economic tool in some states. What's the state share of TSA protection at airports? How much do states contribute to those TSA lines at airports? Percent.
Congressman, is this a question that you'll actually allow me to answer? Or would you
I
like
yield
to-
the rest of my time to Mr. Guest.
The chair recognizes Mr. Guest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Chief Ortiz posted on Twitter on March 17th, said, the week in review, 7 agents assaulted, 34,800 apprehension, 16,900 approximate gotaways, $307,421 seized, 1,117 pounds of cocaine seized, 658 pounds of marijuana, 77 pounds of fentanyl, 69 pounds of meth, 21 firearms, 8 sex offenders, 1 gang member, 1 warrant, 1 assault with a deadly weapon. The chief then posted these stats from last week. This post was posted 4 days ago. This week in review, 8 agents assaulted, 33,000 apprehensions, 15,292 approximate gotaways, 239 pounds of meth, 50 pounds of cocaine, 106 pounds of fentanyl, 8 sex offenders, 14 firearms seized, $129,318 seized, and 17 gang members apprehended. The chief then posted just 2 days ago, we're talking about what has happened just over the weekend. 1 agent assaulted, 14,200 apprehensions, 399 pounds of cocaine, 185 pounds of meth, 135 pounds of fentanyl, 55 pounds of marijuana, $64,000 seized, 1 firearm, 1 stolen vehicle, 1 gang member, and 2 sex offenders. Again, Mr. Secretary, it baffles me and others when presented with evidence such as this from the Chief of the Border Patrol and the numbers that we have seen over the last 2 years, that this administration continues to maintain that the border is secure. And I know that you and I will never agree on that. We will just have to agree to disagree. But I hope you understand the frustration that we as Republicans see when those statements are made to Congress, that when we see what is happening on a weekly basis, those stats are startling. And for this administration to come in before Congress and testify that the border is secure because we're doing a better job of detecting, I think that that's just an inaccurate, if not a false, misleading statement. One of the things that Chief Ortiz said 2 weeks ago is he said that CBP, he said that under this administration has become the processing enterprise. To kind of expand out, he basically said that securing and apprehending the border came second and took a back seat to the fact that we are processing and that we are processing and allowing illegals into the country in an expedited manner. I saw in your recent your recent budget request on beginning on page 3 and continuing on to page 4, you state that FY24 budget includes a Southwest Border Contingency Fund of up to $4.7 billion, an emergency funding source to respond to immigrant surges along the border. I've been to the Salt-Sided facilities. I was at the Salt-Sided facility in El Paso, a facility that's just basically a gigantic tent that's out in the middle of nowhere. And that facility, I was told that the cost of that facility on an annual basis is $200 million just for that facility. And again, that includes the staff that mans that. And I know that there's medical personnel and processing personnel and all the things that go, food personnel, all the things that go along with that. but you equate that across the southern border, and I know that there are multiple processing centers. If there's just 5 salt-sided facilities, that's $1 billion a year that we're spending just on processing alone. I know that when these processing sectors become full, that we'll often then fly immigrants to other sectors to have them processed. And I was told that that costs roughly $90,000 per flight. And so I believe that Chief Ortiz is correct when he says that what has happened under this administration is instead of trying to secure and stop the flow of illegal immigrants coming across the border, we've just gotten better at processing those immigrants. And that to me is extremely disturbing. Disturbing that we're not doing any better job of preventing people. And we can talk about the conditions that exist in South America and some of these other countries and those push factors, but we also have to address the pull factors, which is that immigrants believe that once they step foot on the soil of the United States, that they're going to be able to claim asylum, and that in most cases that is correct. And that, as we know, and we talked about the broken immigration court, that they're going to be allowed to remain in the country for 7+ years before their case is ultimately adjudicated. And so those things are very disturbing to me. I do want to ask you a question, particularly as it relates to Title 42. We know Title 42 ends May 11th. When Title 42 was originally set to expire late last year, there were numbers by DHS that talked about that there was believed that there would be a surge of immigrants somewhere roughly 9,000 to 14,000. I've seen estimates as high as potentially 18,000, but let's just take 14,000. 14,000 immigrants a day over 30 days, that's 420,000 immigrants. A number that would dwarf our previous high of 300,000 that we saw in December. Do you still anticipate when Title 42 ends? Are you still anticipating a surge? Are you preparing for the surge? And that once these immigrants come across the country, that we are able to handle the volume that we will be seeing, assuming that these estimates that DHS prepared are accurate?
Congressman Guest, let me answer your question, and then I want to say, if I may, a few things in response to what you expressed before the question was posed. Yes, we continue, of course, to prepare for the end of Title 42. On May 11th, we began preparing in September of 2021. We published a 6-pillar plan. We refreshed that 6-pillar plan in April of 2022. Let me assure you that we are indeed trying to prevent unlawful entries at our southern border. What we implemented on January 5th is a powerful example of how we're trying to prevent that, and doing so effectively while staying true to our asylum laws, the asylum laws that Congress has passed, and that January 5th program has proven, as I have testified previously, has proven extraordinarily successful, number one. Number two, with respect to what you articulated, I do not understate the gravity of the challenge at the southern border. I want to assure you of that. Some of the data that you shared speaks of the gravity of the challenge accurately, correctly. It also speaks to the heroic work of our Border Patrol agents. With respect to processing, case processing, and Chief Ortiz certainly will communicate this, we have been very, very focused on deploying personnel to do that processing, contract personnel, case processing personnel, to make sure that our Border Patrol agents are out in the field doing the law enforcement work that they are equipped to do. We, in addition, need to fundamentally, as you and I agree, fix our broken immigration system.
Mr. Secretary, one last question. I know I'm bleeding over into my time, Mr. Chairman, and then I will yield back and will not ask for any
just let it
additional
roll
time. Thank you.
right into yours.
Last question, as it relates to drug trafficking, what we're seeing across the border as a whole. Do you believe that one of the primary missions, if not the primary mission of DHS, should be to prevent the flow of illegal drugs, cocaine, methamphetamine, particularly fentanyl, heroin, from coming across the southern border?
Yes,
and so you do believe that, correct?
yes, along with our federal partners and state and local.
All right,
This is an
and-
all-in effort.
And I know and you and I may disagree on those that come through ports of entry versus not. I believe that many of the estimates that I've seen from DHS believe that 90% of the illegal drugs flow into the country across ports of entry. Is that correct as well?
That is correct. And when I cite that statistic, I'm speaking specifically about fentanyl.
Yes, sir. And so then let me ask you, as I understand from looking at your budget request, there is it $305 million for new technology?
Yes.
And that would be including scanners and things along the border, maybe K-9 officers, things to be able to better detect, better screen traffic that's coming across the United States.
That's in addition to, for example, K-9 officers.
Yes.
That's with respect to our technologies such as non-intrusive inspection technology, which is so effective.
Well, and so I guess my concern, if that should be, and I believe that it should be one of the primary missions, if not the primary mission of DHS to prevent the flow of illegal drugs coming into the border. Your budget has requested $4.7 billion for emergency funding to respond to the immigrant surge, but only $305 million to upgrade the necessary technology to control our ports of entry, because ports of entry, they also fall under DHS. Every vehicle, every individual that comes across there we have the potential to screen those individuals. But it would seem to me that our priorities are misaligned. If we're spending $4.7 billion for processing, and we're only spending $300 million for new technology that could keep drugs out of our community, technology that could keep young people from ingesting fentanyl and help stop this drug crisis. I'll just tell you that as a prosecutor, that I believe those priorities are misaligned. And so do you believe that we should be spending more than the $305 million that's in the budget? And I understand that as a budget that came from your department, but do you believe that that is an adequate amount, particularly comparing that to the $4.7 billion that you've requested to respond to the surge? And I'll allow him to answer, and then I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman, I would welcome the opportunity to share with you all of the money that we are spending to interdict and to prevent drugs from entering our country through the ports of entry, because the $305 million is with respect to technology. That is not our only investment. We're also investing in personnel. We're also investing through the infrastructure legislation that passed, a monumental achievement. We're also investing in modernizing our ports of entry so that we can maximize the impact of the devotion of personnel, of the implementation of new technologies. So I'd welcome the opportunity to speak with you, because the $305 million is by no means the only investment in the effort that you and I agree needs to be a high priority.
Thank you, Mr. Guest. For the get-back questions that were asked today, members of the subcommittee had asked it to respond within 15 business days. And any of the members who have additional questions that they want to put in writing, I'd ask you to also respond to those within 15 business days of your receipt. I'd like to thank you again for being here, Mr. Secretary. And with that, this subcommittee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.